My name is Kim, for those who don't know me. I run WeWork Labs in London since about 1.5 years. Matt, who's with us on the call today, has been a mentor for a few months now and is investor principal at Anthemis Capital. Matt, I'll allow you to introduce yourself a bit later. But essentially, Matt mostly works with startups in the financial services and insurance industry in the widest sense of the word. And is here today actually for all your questions. Like, we all are in a very uncertain environment right now, and Matt kindly dedicated some time to just answer any questions you may have. He is mostly London focused, I think, Matt, or Europe wide?
Sorry, say that once more. Focused on?
Mostly London, UK, or Europe, or global, your guys' portfolio?
So our focus is North America and Europe.
Okay, got it. So keep that in mind when Matt answers questions. Will be mostly from that angle, but the floor is yours. Matt, do you mind doing a quick introduction, also in your background and kind of what you currently do?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks everyone for joining. Nice to have you with us. So I, as mentioned, I work at Anthemis. We're an early stage venture firm focused on financial services. And my focus within the firm is in particular on the topics of insurance and risk management, along with a few other spaces that I guess we would refer to as adjacencies. So spaces where we observe that there's an opportunity to build tech-enabled businesses that are going to have a knock-on impact on financial services. So some examples of those are things like mobility, energy, agriculture, health, smart cities, that kind of stuff. I joined Anthemis 3 years ago. Previously worked at a large reinsurance company called Swiss Re in London and Zurich. And joined Anthemis to be working on our insurance and risk management investments at the pre-seed, seed, and Series A stages. We've been deploying capital from the fund that I work on for the last 3 years. We've made over a dozen investments and are aspiring to continue investing over the next few months. Up until a few weeks ago, I was saying to people, by summer, we would love to make a handful more investments. I think maybe, 5 or 6 might be a stretch, but I'd love to keep going and continue to make some great investments. Maybe just a couple of words on kind of our investment appetite. So as I said, pre-seed, seed, Series A is generally when we invest. We tend to be a lead investor, although we're flexible on that. We, as mentioned, invest in North America, continental Europe, UK. We look at Israel. It's a market that we like, we think is interesting, but we haven't done.
That's perfect. I think you broke up. You broke up a little bit the last sentence, but I think we got the gist, or maybe it was just my Wi-Fi. That's amazing. Thanks again for joining us. And I think that's one question that probably everybody here has, but I will please, as we're a small group, just unmute yourself and ask questions and join the conversation. Everybody is wondering, is investment frozen, right? And we actually, I think, to the London-based teams, we circulated a list that was kind of crowdsourced the other week, where investors said we are still investing or just raise a fund. Some people say this is more marketing and more claiming, and actually not actively investing. So maybe just to kick off the conversation, what are your thoughts there? Looking at the general ecosystem and.
So no one on the call will be surprised when I say everything is up in the air right now. And from a venture perspective, there are a number of challenges across a number of different fronts. So I think everyone is trying to say that they're open for business. Everyone is trying to say that they want to keep investing. I think the reality is that some will be able to, because they've already got established remote working practices. They're already investing in teams, in various different countries, and are used to interacting with people through things like Zoom. I think for some other funds, it's a little bit more challenging. And I think it's a little bit more challenging on maybe not just a process level. So, they haven't kind of set up for remote working, but also on a more fundamental level. And what I mean by that is, for some, if you're an entrepreneur going to speak to venture capital funds right now, the one thing that I would recommend you do, kind of almost question number one, is ask whether that fund is able to get their hands on money. If you think about it from, as venture investors, we are reliant on what are called LPs, our limited partners. partners are the companies, the investors, sometimes the individuals that provide us with the money to go and invest into startups, and part of a portfolio. So they're sometimes investing in bonds, they're sometimes investing in equities, and then sometimes investing in what we call the liquid assets, such as venture capital and private equity. And some of when we want to make an investment, we send what's called a drawdown notice, a capital call to our LPs. And for some investors out there in the world, those LPs don't want to receive those notices because they don't have the cash right now. They don't want to, they don't want to receive a notice that tells them they've got 10 days to wire 5 million euros. And so some investors are deliberately taking a break. They are deliberately, they'll still meet with companies, they're still meeting with startups, but they don't want to put their LPs under pressure, the pressure of having to fund kind of capital calls right now. And so some are withdrawing from the market. I think, from our perspective, one of the pieces of the I guess puzzle when we are evaluating a company is as part of our DD process, we do typically meet with an entrepreneur. We really value that opportunity to sit down, look them in the eye, and get a feel for, we're going to get our money back, or we're going to get maybe hopefully more back. And so that's
how do you do that over Zoom? Do you even think it's possible to achieve the same understanding of who somebody is and over video call?
I think it is. I think it is possible. I think it's harder. I think it maybe takes more time, but I think it is. I think one of the other things that is related to meeting a founder face to face is being able to visit the office, being able to see the culture, the kind of to see the diversity in the room. Those are really important topics for us. And I think, that will be a little bit harder now. And, it may mean that we have to kind of meet individual members of the team kind of, face to face separately. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, hopefully, fingers crossed it's possible, and we'll certainly try. You've got to be sure that you can work with the people that you're going to be, getting involved with. I sometimes receive calls at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night from entrepreneurs that desperately need to talk about something that's happening in the business. You want my test. Sometimes people call it the airport test. Do you want to get stuck in an airport with this person? My test is if someone calls me at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night, do I want to pick up the phone? And that's something I really look for in a founder.
Matt, how do you test that? And how do you test grit? Because of course, everybody can say like, yeah, I will do this until I eat that. Well, okay. I once met a founder who sold his house to keep his startup life, which I'm maybe a bit overload on grit, but how do you test grit? Do you get what I mean? Like other
Absolutely.
than the founder just telling you that they
so first of all, it's not always financial, because not everyone has got the resources and the means to be able to, for example, sell a house, to be able to finance something. I think if you do have that kind of ability and you decide to do it, that's great, because it really demonstrates a commitment. But that's absolutely not necessary. I think when we spend time with entrepreneurs, we really like to kind of tease out some of the experiences that those people have had in the past. Cases maybe, within jobs that they've had or projects that they've worked on, whether inside the workplace or outside of the workplace. We like to get a feel for what has that entrepreneur gone through before. It might be a family issue. It might be something that they've had to deal with at home. Or it could be, challenging circumstances in the office. I wouldn't say we're indifferent, but we're open to, founders demonstrating that grit in all sorts of different ways. So there isn't a formula. There's not one size fits all, but it's something that we more kind of get a feel for over a period of time and working with the founder and understanding their business.
Anyone feel free to unmute at any time. But one question we often hear is, when you explain these criteria that you have to invest in founders, they sound quite simple and they sound to a lot of people like, oh, I can do that. And yet, and this is not Anthemis related, but generally investment related, a lot of people get rejection after rejection. What are the most common things that you see, and this is a question that comes over and over again, but that you see that people should really avoid, whether it's something that turns you off immediately when you scroll through their deck the first minute, or even when they email you, or what are things people should really look out for to avoid a common pitfall?
So I guess with the caveat that this is kind of sample of one, me, and and every fund is going to be a little bit different. I think I'll give you the basic framework that almost every venture investor uses is product, market, and team, right? And so often there's a big difference. So let's start with product, for example. The biggest reason that we would kind of pass on the basis of product is it either doesn't, if it's a bit later stage, it doesn't do what you said it could do, and that happens quite a lot, or it's something that's pretty easily replicable, or you're pitching for example, a big later stage investment, and actually it's just an MVP and it's really, really early. And there's a mismatch between the source of capital and the kind of maturity of the product. So that's what I would say. Those are the kind of common things on product. On market, it's about either not tackling a big enough market, and the reasons why VCs go after big markets is kind of well documented. I don't need to go into it here. Or if you go after a small market in the first place, you need to make sure that you're able to explain what are those other kind of avenues of opportunity that are going to open up as you grow the business. And what we expect when we make investment is usually the company isn't going to become a really big company in the area that is immediately going after when we make the investment. They'll go down one path and then they'll realize actually there's a bigger opportunity here, or, oh, I've got a completely different kind of use for my product over here. It's a bit like a branch on a tree. You kind of go down.
And you're okay with that. You're okay with them pivoting.
That's okay. That's okay. But have a hypothesis as to where those big markets are and how what you learn and what you do in that smaller market can get you to the bigger market. The good thing about what we do about financial services is most markets in financial services are big markets, whether it's payments, whether it's insurance or banking. Those are financial products that a lot of people touch. So that's market. And then team is really about two things. It's about having the industry experience. So if you, for example, are going into something in travel or hospitality, make sure that you have the experience in that industry, maybe not you, but someone on the team that is able to contribute that on a day-to-day basis. And then the flip side is make sure that you have the tech. So you have the tech experience. And when I say that, what I mean is a lot of people, so in my former industry in insurance, a lot of insurance people would leave the insurance industry and try to set up new businesses, but they didn't have they didn't have the tech knowledge in the team. So you've got to have the industry experience and the tech experience in the same place, because we believe that it's the kind of fusion of the two that is going to help you build kind of a big business in your particular space. So that's kind of a loose
feel
framework.
That outsourcing the tech in the beginning, if it's not a deep tech product, you feel that is not advisable, or do you feel that's enough to get certain companies to an initial stage where they can test the product?
We talk about outsourcing tech a lot at Anthemis and with our portfolio companies and on the boards that we are involved with. What I would honestly recommend is always build your own tech to get going, have it in-house, have complete control over it. And when you get to a point where you feel like you've achieved as much as you can with the team that you've got and the skills that you've got in the team, it's perfectly fine to outsource specific, discrete projects, bits of work to another company to get them to develop it. Perhaps where it's more, for example, where it's something that isn't necessarily going to give you an edge. It's maybe it's just something that's a bit more vanilla, or something that is a hygiene factor, I guess you might call it. That's the stuff that you should outsource. But my feeling is that you should always have control over the kind of the core of your tech from as early as possible and for as long as possible. So the first one that I would ask is why now? So it could have been 12 months ago, maybe it's in 12 months time, but why now? Why is it that your idea is particularly suited to this point in time? The second one would be, what is it about your product or the company that is going to be difficult to replicate? What is the moat that you aspire to build around that business? And then the third question would be, what are you looking for from an investor apart from cash? Like, there is maybe today a little bit less cash around, but there are sources of capital that you can tap into. But one question that we ask every single time is, what are you looking for from us apart from the check that we write? And the worst, by the way, the worst possible answer that you can give us to that question is, I just want your money. I just want your money, and then kind of for you to leave us alone, because if that's the case, then we're probably not the best fit for you guys. And we do get that answer sometimes, by the way. Not often anymore, but we still do sometimes. Our philosophy is, and this is the same for many other firms, we never say never, right? So if someone came along with a great idea, and they had, worked with an external firm for the tech, we wouldn't just say, no, we're never investing just out of hand. I would really encourage you to think about, the business risk that you're running, because if you're working with a contractor, like an external contractor, and a single individual, you're basically subject to, their whim, right? If they decide this week, actually, I want to go and do something else next week, I'm more interested in something else, then, they're well within their right to do that. And if you're working with another firm, another, like a developer, a company that employs developers, you need to, what is their financial position? If you put the phone down on Friday and then call them again on Monday, are they going to be there? What comfort do you have? And so when you do that, you should absolutely take references. You should speak to as many other entrepreneurs as you can that have worked with that company to get some comfort, and try and put in place as many kind of redundancies as possible. Because, if you're bringing in external investors, to your business, they're going to ask some questions if your tech developer capabilities kind of go down one day, and you struggle to get them back up. So have backups, have a very clear reason as to why you think, it's not something, a kind of capability that you need to have, but also think about, the positioning. If you're positioning yourself as a tech business, then, it naturally makes sense to have some of that tech capability in-house. Yeah. Hopefully that helps. Okay, good question. That's a question that we asked ourselves about 3 months ago. We met with a great entrepreneur who had a really interesting idea, and we felt like there was some potential, but they hadn't hired the hiring of the CTO, and your ability to attract a CTO as being quite an important test of the company's attractiveness in the market. And so in that case, we didn't invest because we wanted that CTO in place. We committed to, it sounds like a cliche, but we committed to keep in touch and wanted to, we're still in touch with the entrepreneur. But it's important, I think, for us to see how an entrepreneur goes about bringing that person in, and the way in which they prioritize that hire, and the equity split and everything else gives us indication as to how important the tech piece is to that CEO, that founder. And those are all interesting data points that we can learn from. So I think we have done in the past. In the most recent case, we didn't. And I would expect it to kind of, be mixed in the future as well. I love this question because there's no single answer, and it really, and so it really depends. And I guess to give you a couple of examples. So there are some companies that we speak to that really need, I guess, slightly more of a top heavy team. And so by that, I mean, there are some companies that we look at that absolutely need separate individuals as kind of chief product officer, chief technology officer, chief exec, and maybe, some other role. And so in those cases, when you need quite a few senior individuals at that level, then the amount of equity, there's only so much equity to go around, right? And so in those cases, the amount is kind of pretty limited as to what you can give everyone. I would say if you're just starting out, I would probably say, as a CTO, probably a minimum of 20 is probably what I would expect. I think at that point, we would feel like factoring in the fact that they're going to be diluted over the next kind of period of, each of the, there are various stages in a company's growth that we label, and we can all debate the usefulness of these labels and whether they're even applicable anymore. But the way that I would generally describe the kind of different phases are, so pre-seed. So pre-seed being, you might have the loose workings of an MVP, or you might have, designs. It might be a pitch deck, for example. It might be as early as that. Some venture investors do invest at pre-seed. We are one of those, and we will invest alongside other angels at that stage. The next stage along is kind of seed, which some people describe as a phase, but seed is when, you've got a product, it's in market. You're probably, you might have sold, a couple of products, it's very, very early days, but you've probably got something in market. Typically, a company at that stage has already raised angel funding at pre-seed stage, maybe a little bit of venture funding at the VC stage, from VCs that are interested in that stage. And then you move on to Series A, which is beginning to scale. And at that point, it's typically just venture investors. I think from thinking about angels and their involvement over the next few months, I would expect the angel investing in general to go down. And that's largely because, if you are an angel investor with a broad array of investments, your investments over the last week and a bit have taken a hammering. You really, and obviously there are always exceptions, but there are probably going to be very few angel investors that have got sufficient capital just hanging around that they can deploy into an early stage startup without kind of any worry. So I think overall angel investing is likely to go down. That's my hunch. So if you're, depending on the stage that you're at, it's perfectly acceptable and known and normal to co-invest alongside angels, or for angels to have invested in the company before. I wouldn't necessarily rely on it too much at this stage in this kind of cycle, or this part of the kind of external events that are happening. But it may depend on your network, and it may depend on the local kind of ecosystem that you're part of. I think the challenges that angel investors have got are pretty similar to the ones that we have, which is, a lot of angel investors like to have a coffee with the company that they're investing in. They want to meet face to face. They want to shake your hand. I know that's kind of a bit taboo nowadays now, but they want to shake your hand, and they want to say hello and get a feel for, if they can trust you. So not going to be easy at the really early stage, but there are still networks, there are still resources out there for the really early stage companies that you can kind of find online. And so, I would encourage you to take a look at those if it might help out with your fundraising challenges.
Everybody evacuated. We're here in London as well. Matthew, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Katie has a written one because she is multitasking, giving 2 kids at home now, which I think a lot of us recognize. Don't worry, Katie.
Absolutely.
So she says, I'm the co-founder of Beam, an online exercise platform for people with chronic health conditions. We are looking to raise this year, but now more immediately, given the opportunities presenting themselves as a result of COVID-19, we are a fully remote team of 8 people. My question is whether Matthew has any thoughts or biases on remote teams versus in-office teams.
So I have a little bit of data I can share on this. So out of all the companies that I've invested in over the last 3 years, I've only invested in one company that was fully remote, and that investment was in January or kind of January, February. So it was a more recent one. And the other data point I have is that one of the companies that I work with has now decided, on the basis of the last couple of weeks, to get rid of their office entirely. And they are now fully remote. So one that was always fully remote, one that is going remote. I think an investor that has got a fixed perspective on this question is probably a bit of an idiot. I think the situation that we're in right now is such that the only thing that works is remote. And I think if you are able to keep a handle on the culture of the business and effectively kind of maintain communication in the business, and there's a benefit in terms of your costs coming down and things like that, I think that can be really good for business. There are some companies that are inherently better suited to in-person, being all in the same room, having face-to-face conversations. So it's a great question that you should be asking, you know, any investor that you speak to, honestly. You know, what is your stance on this? Because if their stance is no, it's never going to work, then save your time and move on to the next. But I think we're all learning that you know, that remote working does work, and we are okay to a certain extent. I think maybe the one thing that I would add as a more practical tip is that if you do decide to maintain kind of being completely remote, the company that I work with that is going remote is planning to get a subscription to one of those the companies that provide meeting space, so that they have somewhere where they can have meetings and they still can meet face to face with people in a city, like, you know, wherever. Maybe that's an option. It can be relatively inexpensive every month, and, you know, at least allows you to kind of maintain some kind of presence somewhere. So yeah, wouldn't be a roadblock, I think, for most VC firms right now.
Yeah, I think, Casey, I don't know where you're based, but I've never heard, I think, an investor say absolutely not to a remote team. But thanks for your question. I think that brings us, unfortunately, to the end. Oh, Casey's from New York. Okay, thank you, New York. Thanks, Matthew, so much for your time. Super insightful. I love how we can do these things in a small format and casual format. So anyone, as Matthew says, very kindly shared his email address, so ask him any questions, but please, he might take a few days to respond if there are many of you. Matt, thanks again, and have a good weekend.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining. Good luck with growing your businesses in this environment. It's not easy, but I know you'll all be fine, and you'll come out the other side doing well. So good luck, everyone. Thanks for joining.